r/nosleep. Posted by you/deathbykoolaidman. My dad sold my soul to the devil. Yup, just about as crazy as the title sounds. My dad is what they call a macho man. All he wanted was sons. He lived and breathed for another Keller boy. Naturally, when my older brother was born, he was overjoyed. 3 years later, he begged my mom to have another son. When he found out we were twins, he was excited to have 3 sons. So when my brother and I came out, and he saw that I was a girl, he was despaired. I've always been his least favorite kid, and he never tried to hide it. While he named my brothers Anthony and David, which mean priceless and beloved respectfully, he named me Lilith, which literally means night monster. While my brothers and mom tried to soften that direct punch to the gut by calling me Lily, he insisted on us all calling me Lilith, so I could feel the disappointment that he felt the day I was born. Clearly him and my mom did not stay married, and quite unfortunately he signed for full custody when Anthony was 5, and David and I too. Things just got worse from there. If he took Anthony and David out to eat or to see a movie, I was to stay home. He spent all his time playing sports with my brothers, and wouldn't let me join even though I, as a girl, actually showed a genuine interest in what he was doing with my brothers. When I was 4, Dad got cancer. And from what I heard, it was supposed to be terminal. That's where the title of this story comes into play. Yup, he made a deal with Satan. 15 more years of life if he sold one of his children's souls. And big surprise, he chose me. So once I die, it's off to hell, no matter how little I sin or how much I pray. The first time I remember something happening to me was about a month after my dad made that deal. I was in my tiny, cramped room, trying to sleep on a bed I outgrew years ago, while my brothers and dad watched a movie downstairs, when I saw it. This thing in my closet. It was pale, with gaunt, sunken eyes and a gaping mouth. Its long and bony fingers wrapped around my closet door. There was no question that this thing was a demon. I immediately cried for my dad, who stormed up the stairs and gave me a proper beating for interrupting his movie night with his kids. After that, he called me a little girl for crying and locked me in my room. As I cried all that night, the demon simply watched me from the closet, unmoving. Demons watching me were pretty normal from then on. Sometimes it would be the pale gaunt thing in my closet, other times a dark figure hovering over my bed. And on bad nights, a horned figure with glowing red eyes would stare at me, taunting me through the window. After a while, I stopped being scared of them. One night when I was 9, the gaunt creature was back in my closet, staring at me while I read. He began to make this really weird growling noise, to which I shushed him. He then did something he never did before. While he would occasionally wrap his hand around my slightly ajar door, he never actually came out of my closet. Until that night. In one swift movement, he tore open my closet door and stood up fully, revealing he was taller than the ceiling itself. He bent his neck in an abnormal way to fit under the roof. I rightfully should have been shitting my pants at this moment, but for some reason, I just wasn't that scared. We locked eyes for a while, which was more awkward than scary, so I just went back to reading my book. He just looked at me curiously for a while, until my dad decided he wanted to be a horrible person again, and threw open my door to yell at me for something or other. The entire time the demon just watched. Thankfully my dad left after slapping me across the face, but I was crying again for the rest of the night. The demon, who now looked at me with something more than curiosity, looked back at my closed door, trying to see my dad. As I did nothing but sob, the demon just sat down beside my bed, towering over me. Neither of us looked at each other the rest of the night. I cried while he just stared off in the distance, but I wasn't alone, and that was all I cared about. From then on things changed. I wasn't just not scared of the demons, I welcomed them. Especially the gaunt-looking one who sat by me that night. He would sit with me whenever my dad was bad to me, or whenever I had boy troubles at school. He never talked at me, and barely ever looked at me, but all I cared about was that he was there for me. I even gave him a name. Papa. I remember this one night, I was 14, and upset because Jacob, the boy I liked, didn't invite me to the Valentine's dance at our school. On top of that, my dad had gotten into one of his moods, and had thrown a chair at me. When I ran into my room, I was almost relieved to see Papa crouched by the closet. Papa, I cried, running to him. It was stupid, I know, I was calling a literal demon Papa, but I had nobody else. He was the only one who had ever shown me any sympathy. At first he stepped back, but as I cried even harder, he looked at me in the eyes, maybe for the first time since that night he stepped out of the closet. Then he did something surprising. He hugged me back. As I felt his icy cold hands wrap around me, I should have been terrified, but I was filled with love. Love, for finally finding a dad who loved me. But one night, as I was reading To Kill a Mockingbird for my school project, I made a mistake. Papa looked curious, so I decided to read out loud to him. I guess I made too much noise though, because David opened my door. "Lilith, who the hell are you? What the fuck is that?" he screamed, and my dad came rushing up. Papa couldn't hide in time, and now, Anthony, David, and my dad all stared him down. He stood up, revealing his giant stature, and David began to cry, while Anthony froze in place and my dad ran off to get a vial of holy water he had kept by his bed ever since the deal was made. As I tried to run away with Papa, he stopped me and shook his head. We both knew it was too late. I cried as I hugged him goodbye, and as my dad approached us with the holy water and sprayed it on Papa, he let out a blood-curdling screech that could have been heard across the country. I watched in horror as Papa, who had stayed by my side all these years, faded to nothingness. "There," Dad said. "It can't hurt us anymore, sons," he said, embracing David and Anthony in a hug. I just laid over Papa's lifeless body, uncontrollably sobbing. We were all so caught up in our own worlds we didn't notice something come up behind us. He was large, even bigger than Papa, and had 2 large horns, a goat's head, and a large stick in his hand. Dad turned around slowly, looking to this thing as he glared down at my abuser. "Your Majesty, we had a deal, Stanley. I granted you 15 more years of life, on 2 conditions. 2. It boomed, and I noticed David had wet himself. "It was a misunderstanding, sir, my daughter. You were granted 15 more years of life, on the conditions that I get your daughter upon her death, and you never harm anyone, ever again. Do you understand?" it asked. "Yes, and I haven't. Promise." The creature laughed. "First you break a promise, and now you lie? To His Satanic Majesty himself? Seeing you have not only harmed your daughter her entire life, but have killed one of my best minions, you have broken my trust. I'm breaking off the deal." My dad got down on his knees. "No, please, I'll do anything," he begged. Satan looked at me. "There is one way, if Lilith, your daughter and the one you cursed, forgives you. I will set you free, and you will live the rest of your life." My dad slowly turned to me, and put on a smile. "Hey, Lily, what about it? Look at me, I'm your dad. Your Papa. I raised you. Don't you love me? I'm your dad, for fuck's sake," he said, getting more agitated as I stared at him. "It's up to you, Lilith," Satan said. I looked to Papa's body on the floor, then back to my dad. "Come on, you gonna believe Satan, or your dear old dad?" my dad said, pleading to me. I glared at him. "My dad is dead, bitch. You killed him," I said. "I don't forgive you." And with that, Satan dragged my dad down to the netherworld, my brothers and I hearing his screams until it was far away enough that it faded away, to where he could never hurt me again. As my brothers cried in the loss of their dad, I walked back to Papa, on the ground, and kissed his forehead. "Goodbye, Papa. Thank you." Posted by you/deathbykoolaidman. There's something weird about the old house where I live. I was always alone. My parents kicked me out as soon as I turned 18. The rest of my family lived across the world. I didn't have many friends. Long story short, I wasn't loved. Most of my time I spent aimlessly wandering around my town, hoping that somebody would come for me. It never happened. There was this house, though, that I always felt drawn to. It was abandoned, looked like it had been for quite some time. Vines were crawling across the exterior, the windows were boarded up, and the paint was chipping away. I never explored it, mainly because it didn't look safe. But as I walked by it one very late night, I realized even if it was unsafe, and I died in it, nobody would care. They wouldn't even go looking for me. "Hey, what the hell?" I muttered to myself. I might as well. As I approached the front door, it creaked open by itself. The inside was musty and covered in dust, but not nearly as broken down as it was on the outside. I was just about to enter when I heard something strange. A piano playing. And right by the piano, a strange shadow getting larger and larger as it slithered towards me. I stepped back in shock. It was something. It had tentacles in place of arms, and its smile was sharp and yellow, unnaturally large. Its eyes resembled a snake's more than it did a human's. It held out a tentacle towards me. "Come. Stay. You'll love it here." Its cold tentacle wrapped around my arm and pulled me into the house, where the door slammed behind me. It dragged me towards a table, where dozens of other creatures sat. Something with nothing but a gaping black hole for a mouth and eyes drooled beside me. A monster with pale skin and no pupils grinned at me. An octopus-looking creature in a droopy chef's hat walked towards the table, a grand plate of disgusting-looking entrees in his tentacles. "Dig in," the tentacle creature said, that same wide grin staring at me. What is? Who are you?" I asked. The tentacle creature laughed. "Oh, foolish one. Look at us. We were just like you once. Outcast. Alone. Nowhere to go. Until we found this house. Stay a while. You'll be like us in no time," it hissed. "I will never be like you," I yelled, and ran towards the door, but it didn't open no matter how hard I pushed. The creature with white eyes grabbed me and dragged me upstairs, into a room with a single, moldy-looking bed. "Rest, young one. You have lots ahead of you." It smiled, and I could see the bugs in its teeth. "Let me go home. Please." It shook its head. "You cannot leave." "I cannot leave, even if I wanted to. This is your home now, as it is mine." "I am not like you," I said, tears in my eyes. "This is your home, not mine." The creature laughed a wheezy, throaty laugh. "What makes you think I am not like you, young one? I'm a human. You're just something," I said. It sighed. "I was a human once." It reached into its dirty shirt pocket, and pulled out a picture. It took me a while, but as I looked at it, the resemblance was there, and it became clearer to me that it was, in fact, that monster. This was me. I was alone, like you. I had nowhere to turn but this house. I hated it, just like you. But as time went on, I found myself more at home. It changed me. You don't have to love it right away, young one, but trust me. This is where you are meant to be. Just, give it a try, okay?" he said, and walked out. I sat on the disgusting bed, processing everything. Just, give it a try, okay? Slowly, I lied down on the bed, and to my surprise, it was comfortable. To be fair, my bed at home was just an air mattress lying on my kitchen floor, but this was like nothing before. I fell asleep in an instant, and I had a thought that maybe this wasn't going to be so bad after all. The next morning as I woke up, I looked different. Not too different, just enough for me to notice. My skin was paler, and my arms were veinier. My hair looked more matted, and when I smiled to myself in the mirror, I couldn't help but notice it looked similar to the tentacle monsters. As time went on, I felt more and more like them. Things I used to be disgusted by became hobbies of mine, and things that I used to fear made me smile a wide smile like everybody else. I barely noticed any changes in me until about a week later. Were my teeth sharper, or was I just crazy? I just shook that thought off. But as time went on, the used to things I got. I felt at home finally. This was home, where I could find joy in tearing a live rat's head off and drinking its blood, or where I could eat live bugs whenever I so desired. This was meant to be. I was turning into the man I was supposed to be. The tentacle monster, who I now recognized as the most esteemed of gentlemen, smiled at me one day. "Ah, brother, you have become one with us. A true monster." Monster? Who was he calling monster? I was no. I looked in the mirror, and saw myself. My skin was now completely white. My fingers were long and sharp at the end. My eyes turned yellow like a cat's. My hair had fallen off. I was one of them. One day, as I was lounging by the piano, I heard the door creak open. A young man, maybe about my age, looked around. Hello? Hello?" he called. I crawled towards him, eager to make a new friend. He jumped back at the sight of me. I flashed him my nicest, most gentlemanlike smile. I reached out my hand to him. "Come. Stay. You'll love it here." Posted by you/deathbykoolaidman. My son always gets his words mixed up. "And would you like more eggs, honey?" my mom asked my 4-year-old son, Danny, as we sat at the breakfast table. "Yes." My mother started piling more eggs onto his plate, to which he started wailing. I said yes. My mom gave my wife and I a confused look. "I'm sorry, Danny, does yes mean something different in your home?" she asked. "No, Mom, we're sorry. Danny's been getting his words mixed up. We're going to take him to a speech therapist once we get home. Just last week he threw a tantrum at daycare because he said no to a cookie, and was upset that all the other kids got one and he didn't," I said as my mom picked him up. "Well, if you say so. I'll go give Danny a bath, and then we can head out to the London Eye. Are you excited to go on the big Ferris wheel, love?" my mom asked. "No." Danny excitedly exclaimed, throwing his hands into the air, and we all laughed. This trip was almost perfect. It was the first time my American wife and son had visited my hometown of London, and so far we were all having so much fun. The only thing to put a damper on our vacation was my son's constant mixing up of yes and no. I should have got it checked out long ago, I know, but I guess I thought it was cute, and now I worried it was too late. My wife, Laura, seemed to think the same thing. "Mark, we really should get Danny's speech checked. It could cause some problems later on." My wife Laura said. "I mean, it's bad enough when he got a British accent from hanging around you." "Well, like father like son," I joked, and we laughed. Just then my mum walked towards us, Danny in tow. He was holding his favorite stuffed animal, a Dalmatian plush he called Doggy, in his hands. He insisted on bringing Doggy along with him on our trip. "Are you sure, love? I don't want Doggy to get lost," my mum said. "No. I'm bringing him," Danny said stubbornly, and I laughed as I hoisted him up onto my shoulders. It really was a lovely day. We walked around London, took Danny and my wife to ride on their first double-decker bus, rode the London Eye, all that tourist-y stuff. We ended it off by getting Danny some ice cream. Danny still kept all of his energy throughout the day, even as the adults slowly got more tired. He was running up ahead of us, which my mom and I had no problem. We both grew up here, we knew the area. Once he got out of our eyeshot though, we began to call him back. "Danny? Danny?" I called, but he didn't come back. After 2 hours of searching, we called the police. After 2 days of searching, he was officially reported missing. I ruined my life looking for him. I made Laura sell our house in the USA so we could move in with my mum to continue searching for him. Every day, I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to search the city, not coming home until 10 p.m. that night. I wouldn't eat with my mum and Laura, in fact most days I wouldn't eat at all. I became more irritated by small things. I started taking my anger out on Laura. Every week I'd send in a new police report, hoping they would do something about it. They never did. There wasn't enough evidence, they would say, it's a cold case. Laura left me 3 years after Danny disappeared. She said she had moved on, it was time I did the same. Mum died from a heart attack 6 years after that. I was alone. No son, no wife, no mum, and it was all my fault. Danny had been gone for 9 years. He would have been 13 now. Then I heard something that rocked my world. I was sitting at the table, the same table Danny ate his last meal at, eggs, which he didn't even like. The news report came on, saying that the police had just busted a 9-year-long child slavery scheme in the middle of London. They were now rescuing all the kids. 9 years. In London. I knew I had to find my son. I sprinted out the door, running through the town, trying to find it. There, by the abandoned building I had passed so many times, was a huge section covered in caution tape and surrounded by officers. I could see hundreds of dirty, skinny children, and I knew Danny could be in there. I tore through the caution tape as police chased after me. I screamed my son's name as I avoided all the officers. Then something dropped at my feet. It looked like a lumpy, dirty rag, but upon further inspection, I could see it was Doggy. "Daddy?" a boy said. He was about 3 feet taller now and dirty and thin as a stick, but under all that grime, I knew. This was Danny. "Oh, my boy, I yelled, throwing my arms around him. At last, I had finally found my son, who I spent 9 miserable years looking for. That's when the police caught up to me. 3 restrained me, while the 4th approached my son. "Boy, do you know this man?" He turned to me. "If he doesn't, we'll have to arrest you until further notice." I looked to my son, pleading to him with my eyes. "Danny, please," I whispered. The 3 policemen tightened their grip around me. Danny looked to me, then back to the officer. "No," he said, and the 3 policemen all picked me up with ease and carried me into their policeman. "Danny. Wait, Danny. That's my son, he's my son. I loved him with all my heart, you can't take him away from me again." And as we drove away, I could see Danny one last time. He followed me with his eyes, and mouthed one last thing to me. "Bye Daddy." Posted by you/deathbykoolaidman. There's something strange following my husband around. I didn't notice it until I moved into his house, about a year ago. I've been married to my husband Jack for around 6 months, and things have only gotten stranger. At first I thought he was crazy, as much as it hurts me to admit that. He always woke up in the middle of the night, claiming there was something in the room with us. He'd cover up the mirrors in the house, and he'd constantly check behind him whenever he walked anywhere. Whenever I told him that I couldn't see anything, he'd tell me that was a good thing. It can't hurt you if you can't see it, he'd say. Then I started seeing it, too. It started one night, after we had eaten dinner. We were still sitting at the dinner table, too lazy to get up. Jack had said something offhand about the news, and I looked up from my phone to respond to him. There it was. In the reflection from the window behind him, what looked like the zombie of a woman, flesh falling off and face mangled, standing directly behind him, her partially decomposed hand on his shoulder. I jumped back and let out a small gasp, quickly trying to compose myself. "What's wrong?" Jack asked. You didn't see anything, did you?" He looked concerned. "It can't hurt you if you can't see it," I remembered. "No," I said. "Didn't see a thing." Then I started seeing it more and more. I never saw it in person, only through reflections. In the mirrors whenever Jack forgot to cover them, in the water when I tried to have a bath, in the shiny metal dishes when I was cleaning them. Maybe it was stress, I told myself. Things hadn't been great with Jack lately, admittedly. He had been wanting to have a kid for a while, and kept begging me to have one with him. I told him I wasn't ready. But he never listened. Maybe I was just seeing things. But then again, why would Jack be seeing it, too? Could two people be seeing the same hallucinations? Jack had been getting more and more paranoid, I had noticed. I tried to go down into the basement, which I had actually never been down to look for a screwdriver I needed. Jack had stopped me. "No," he shouted desperately. Please, stay out of there." He grabbed my wrist, pulling me back. I don't want it to hurt you, too. Please, darling, I'm only trying to protect you. Do you trust me?" He looked me in the eyes, and I realized, even if we fought, even if he was super paranoid, that all he wanted to do was protect me. "Yes. With all my heart," I said. Good. "Now, promise me you'll never go down there. For your own good," he said, pulling me into a hug. "I promise." I thought that would be the end of it. I thought that if I patched up my relationship with Jack, that things would go back to normal. They didn't. I still saw it, even more than before. At least once a day, that horrid, rotting corpse would be in reflections, staring at me, staring at Jack, anything. One day, it all came to a head. It was night, and Jack wasn't home. I was getting ready for bed, when I saw it in the mirror. Usually if I looked away and then looked back, it would go away, but this time, it didn't work. "What do you want?" I asked, not expecting a response. "Avenge me," it responded in a raspy, broken voice. I stepped back. What do you mean?" "The basement. Go down and find the truth. Set me free," it said. "And why should I do that?" The thing laughed. "I was just like you know. Blinded by love. Go into the basement. See who he really is," it said, and suddenly disappeared. Cautiously, I stepped down the stairs leading to the basement, armed with a kitchen knife. I found a box in the very corner of it, and I opened it, hoping it was just a box of Jack's childhood possessions, or maybe a collection of baseball cards. I was wrong. Documents, thousands of documents and personal belongings spilled out of the box. Arthur MacDonald. Jack's real name was Arthur MacDonald, a man who was apparently guilty of first-degree murder. And apparently, he was also legally dead. "Jack," I said in disbelief. "You couldn't." "Oh, he could," a voice suddenly said, scaring me half to death. A small hand mirror in the box held the thing. It was staring at me. "Go ahead. Read the other documents, darling," it said, laughing. She was Michelle MacDonald, Arthur's wife who he had brutally murdered. "I really thought he loved me, Michelle said sadly. But all he wanted was a child. Another heir to his family name. I was a fool." "You weren't a fool," I said. "You were in love. And so was I." "We really are alike, darling," Michelle said. "I tell you what, so long as Arthur keeps this con up, I'm doomed to stay on Earth forever. Set me free." I watched as a hand reached through the mirror, offering me a silver blade. "Do it," she said. "Oh, I will," I answered, taking the knife. "But I can't do it alone." I waited about a week to confront him, waiting for the perfect time. Michelle and I had a plan. Arthur and I were getting ready for bed when Michelle appeared in my phone reflection and nodded. It was time. I discreetly uncovered the mirror as Arthur got into bed. "What should we do for dinner tomorrow, darling?" he asked. "Oh, I don't know," I answered. "Arthur." He looked up. "Babe, what are you talking about?" "I think you know." Just like you know about Michelle. He laughed uncomfortably. How do you know about Michelle? I'm the one asking the fucking questions here. Why did you kill her? He stared at me with cold eyes. All I wanted was a son, you know. And she couldn't give me one. Infertility, you know? 1 in 5 women, crazy, right? So I thought, if she couldn't have kids, who would ever want her? Don't you see? I was doing her a favor. And afterwards, all I had to do was start going by my middle name, and marry another woman. I mean, what were the odds I'd marry 2 barren ladies, you know? One of you had to have a childbearing body. And now that you know, we can start a family together. Wouldn't that be nice? He said. No, I said, beckoning to Michelle. It wouldn't. I watched Arthur's eyes fill with fear as Michelle stepped out of the mirror, filling the room with the foul smell of rot. She limped towards Arthur as I sneakily pulled the silver blade out from my bra, where I hid it. Arthur stood protectively in front of me. Don't worry, darling. She won't hurt you. I laughed. Oh, Arthur. Silly, I said. Without a second thought, I plunged the blade directly into his back. As he crumbled to the ground in pain, I stood beside Michelle triumphantly. I know she won't hurt me. Posted by you/deathbykoolaidman. My dad drags around the corpse of my dead mom. My family was always seen as perfect, the American dream. Everyone in town was jealous of Matt, Laura, and little Reagan McManus. Matt, my father, was a successful businessman who volunteered at the soup kitchen on Saturdays and donated money to the poor. Laura, my mother, was a socialite in town, and spent her extra time as a seamstress, making all her husband and daughter's coats from scratch. And as for me, Reagan, well, I was a straight A student, and captain of the cheerleading squad at school. We were almost like characters in a movie. But real life is different from movies, and I for one knew the truth about our family. Our reputations and personalities were all paper thin, much like the walls in our house. I knew about Dad's affair. I knew about Mom's secret liquor stash. They acted like I wasn't aware of their fighting, but they would argue almost every night. And, due to how loud their arguments were, I even knew about Mom's plan to leave Dad. Matt, I'm sorry. I can't deal with this anymore, she said after they screamed at each other for an hour or two. What about Reagan? What are we going to do about her, huh? Dad yelled. Oh, for crying out loud, she's 16 years old, she'll be out of the house in 2 years. She's not a child anymore. She doesn't need us. My mom said, near tears. I stayed crouched by the staircase, just like I did when I was a little girl. This was one of the biggest arguments they had. The neighbors probably could have heard them. We're done, Matt, okay? I'll go pack my bags. Tell Reagan where to find me. My mom finally said. Neither of them were yelling anymore. Both were calm. My dad sighed. Okay. If you insist. But one thing I watched as he grabbed a bottle of wine from the shelf. One more drink together. To celebrate our years of marriage. My mom looked around. One glass. But after that, I'm packing my bags, she said, rubbing her temples. Dad turned around to get the corkscrew for the wine. For a moment I saw his face contorted from melancholic to enraged, and all in a blur, I watched him turn back around and swing the wine bottle at her head before I could warn her. I stared on in horror as he grabbed a broken piece of glass off the ground and slit her throat. As the blood gurgled out of her, I raced back upstairs into my bedroom, acting like I had been there the whole time. Maybe if I shut my eyes and try to fall asleep, I thought, I'll wake up and realize it was all a dream. But part of me knew that what I saw really happened, and I slowly had to come to terms with the fact that my dad had killed my mom. Even still, when I went downstairs in the morning, I half expected my mom to be in the kitchen, cooking up pancakes and bacon for our Sunday breakfast. What I didn't expect was my dad in the kitchen, holding up my mom's limp body, the floor still a mess of glass, wine and blood. Oh, hello Reagan, you're finally awake. Mom, sorry, no pancake breakfast for us today. She had a big night last night and was just too tired to make us food. I hope cereal works. His voice had an eerie calm to it, and it was only then that I truly processed what was going on. One look at my mom confirmed she was dead. My dad had sewn up the gash on her neck, and her pale, gaunt face stared back at me. Dad? Is Mom okay? I asked, trying to mask my terror with concern. Maybe if I played along, it would be easier. Reagan, sweetie, I just told you. Mommy's feeling tired, he said, rubbing his hand on her forehead. Mommy? I hadn't called Mom Mommy in about 10 years. Maybe a hug from her daughter would help her feel better, he continued, pulling the limp body closer to me. I noticed a swarm of flies flying around near her, and a few of them flew into her ears and nose. I stared into her eyes, barely open. Dad seemed to notice my staring at them, because he grabbed her eyelids and forced them open. "Go on, honey. Hug your mother," he said. I looked at him, then back at her. "God damn it, Reagan, hug your fucking mother," Dad said, throwing her entire weight onto me at once. I toppled over and both Mom and I fell to the floor. Dad walked over and gently grabbed my hands, wrapping them around my mom's cold body. "There we go. Good job, Reagan," he said calmly. Things only got worse from there. Mom's skin changed colors, and her teeth and nails fell out. The flies began to rule over our house, and I felt like they doubled every day. Did anyone ever tell you how bad corpses smell? It's not a smell you can get used to. It's all around me. And worst of all, Dad seemed to be going mental. He danced with my mother at night, dragging her bloated body around as if nothing had ever happened. He would feed her at the dinner table, causing rotting food to accumulate in my mom's mouth, making the smell even worse. Every night he'd force me to kiss my mom goodnight, just like I had to when I was little. Sometimes I felt like I could taste the rot on my lips. I tried to talk to him about it. "What do you mean?" he asked, running his fingers through my mom's hair. Clumps of hair fell as he did this. "I mean, this is fucking ballistic, Dad. The neighbors are starting to worry, and so am I. This can't go on. You need to get rid of that thing and go on with your life," I said, not even realizing what I had said until it all came out. He just stared at me blankly, almost as blank as Mom's face. "Reagan," he said, standing up, Mom in tow. "That was a naughty thing to say. I'm afraid Mom and I are going to have to punish you." He started towards me as I backed away. "You have to sleep in Mom's bed tonight. She'll keep an eye on you to keep you from getting into more trouble." Dad grabbed me by my collar with such force that it hurt. He dragged Mom and I upstairs and into their bedroom, where it seemed the flies had their base. He threw me onto the bed, and shoved Mom on after. "Good night, Reagan. Good night, Mommy." I stayed frozen in terror. "Reagan," Dad said, his voice growing impatient. "Say good night to Mommy." "Gee, good night, Mommy." "Very good. Night night," he said and locked the door. I fought the urge to vomit as Mom's smell became overbearing. Flies swarmed around her, and a few tried to crawl into my ear. I saw as Mom's mouth started to move, and for a second I feared that my father had brought upon the zombie apocalypse, but then I realized she might be talking to me. "Mom? What is it? Please Mom, please help me, Dad is scaring me," I begged, beginning to cry. But she didn't talk to me. I was stupid to think so. Instead, I watched in horror as maggots came out of her mouth and into my face, crawling around as one got in my mouth. That was it for me. I jumped out of bed, gagging. Crawling out of the bedroom window, I tried to escape. But Dad had already guessed my plan. He was waiting at the ground below me as I hoisted myself down from the second story. "Running away, are you? Naughty, naughty, naughty." He waved his finger at me, and I saw he was hiding something behind his back. I backed away. "Mom and I tried to give you a good home. But I guess you were too ungrateful for that, were you? I can't have my only other family member leave me. That would be such a shame," he said, and it was at that moment I started fearing for my life. My suspicions turned out to be true. Dad unveiled what he had been hiding behind his back, the same glass shard he used to kill Mom, still stained with her blood. My instincts kicked in there. I began circles around the house. The only plan I had at that point was to tire him out. But then I had an idea. As I heard him rounding the corner, I opened and slammed the front door as hard as I could, then ran over to the backyard. He fell for it, as I heard him walk into the house not a minute later. I scanned the backyard, searching for a weapon. Eventually I found something, an old baseball bat Dad and I used to play with all the time. I hid behind a tree, hoping he wouldn't find me. I guess he had figured out I wasn't in the house quite quickly, because I heard the backyard door swing open. "Reagan," he taunted. "Come out. I can't lose you, too." I silently cried as he neared the tree. I saw his fingers wrap around the bark. "Peekaboo," he whispered, giggling to himself. I didn't waste any time. I swung the bat directly at his head, and he immediately fell. He aimlessly swung his glass shard around, slicing my arm open. I didn't stop. I beat him over the head multiple times, splattering myself with blood. It wasn't until later I fell out of my rage. I remembered how he taught me how to hit a baseball with this very bat, and all the good times came flooding back to me. I touched his face. He twitched in pain. "Oh, Dad," I cried. "I'm so sorry, Daddy." I pulled him into a hug, and I felt him quivering weakly. "I'll go get you cleaned up," I said. From that day on, Dad and I were a lot closer. I finally understood why he kept Mom around this long. He was just a lonely guy who needed some love, and when the only person who loved him left, he couldn't let go. Sometimes you just need to show a little empathy. Our relationship grew, which made me think that Mom was what was holding us back all these years. I'd make him dinner, and he never complained. He complained about Mom's cooking all the time. Every night we'd watch a movie together. Dad would always pick the same movie to watch, and it became our favorite movie. Weekend at Bernie's. Nighttime was the best. I'd take him upstairs, and we'd read books together before I kissed him goodnight and fell asleep in his arms. "Good night, Daddy," I said as the flies swarmed around both of us. As I kissed him goodnight, a maggot crawled out of his mouth and onto my skin. I wasn't disgusted by it anymore. In fact, I liked it. It was like he was kissing me goodnight, too. I tucked my dad into his bed, right next to Mom. I hadn't touched Mom in weeks. She stayed in her bed, never to leave it. I liked it better that way. Night night. Sleep tight. Don't let the bedbugs bite. Dad, say goodnight to me, too. I waited for a while, but he didn't respond. Dad?